It's a Tuesday night, and you're in seat 23A, 38,000 feet over the Atlantic. New York is 6 hours behind you. You can't sleep. So you're staring out the window at the wing glowing in the moonlight, and a thought drifts up. What if I could just strap on some wings and fly to London faster? You smile at it. You close the blind. You'll forget it by landing. But here's what you probably don't know. That exact thought has been driving humans out of their minds for at least 1,000 years. And around the year 1005 in England, a monk named Aylmer stopped smiling about it. He built the wings, he climbed the tower of his own abbey, and he jumped. And for a few impossible seconds, he flew. The wind caught the wings, the courtyard slid away beneath him. Then he wobbled, pitched forward, and hit the ground hard enough to shatter both legs. He was real. A chronicler of his own abbey wrote it all down. Aylmer limped for the rest of his life, and to his dying day he is said to have insisted he knew exactly what had gone wrong. He had forgotten to build himself a tail. Keep that tail in mind, because the old monk turns out to be right, in a way nobody on Earth could see for another 800 years, and we'll get there. Here's the uncomfortable part. For roughly 1,000 years, this was humanity's entire aviation program. Strap on feathers, climb something tall, flap hard, brake. So how do we get from that to you asleep in a chair in the sky? I want you to hold on to one idea for this entire video. Watch what happens every single time when someone copies the bird harder. And watch what happens the moment someone finally walks away from it. Because the sky was never going to be won by asking, how do birds fly? It was won by the handful of people who asked a much stranger question. What is air? The oldest flight story we have is already a warning label. Daedalus, the mythical inventor, builds wings of feathers and wax to escape Crete with his son Icarus. Icarus climbs too high, the sun melts the wax, and he falls into the sea. It's a myth, your story. But notice what the story assumes. That flying means wings on your arms, feathers, flapping. That assumption would quietly break human bones for the next 2,000 years, because people didn't just tell the story, they tried it. Sometime in the 800s in Cordoba, then one of the most dazzling cities on Earth, a polymath named Abbas ibn Firnas built himself a winged contraption, climbed to a high place, and jumped. According to the earliest account we have, rediscovered in an Arabic manuscript only recently, he actually glided for a moment before crashing and badly injuring himself. His diagnosis? He too had not built himself a tail. Two men, 2 centuries apart, in different civilizations, limping away from the same crash with the same complaint. File that away, the payoff is coming. 5 centuries later, in 1507, an alchemist at the Scottish court, John Damian, announced he would fly from the walls of Stirling Castle all the way to France. A crowd gathered. He jumped in a suit of feathers, dropped more or less straight down, and broke his thigh. His excuse is my favorite in all of aviation history. The story goes that he blamed the feathers. He'd used chicken feathers, you see. Chickens are ground birds, wrong feathers. Obviously. And while Europe was jumping off towers dressed as birds, here's the twist nobody noticed. China had already been flying for centuries, with something that doesn't flap at all. Kites, silk and bamboo, riding the wind on a string, lifting military signal, and in some later accounts, even lifting men above armies. Nobody saw the kite as the answer to human flight. It didn't look like a bird, but it was the first thing we ever built that genuinely rode the air. Remember the kite. 1,000 years from now in this story, the men who finally crack the sky will basically be flying one. Around 1490, the flapping dream got its greatest champion. Leonardo da Vinci filled notebook after notebook with flying machines, ornithopters with great bat-like wings, driven by a pilot hauling on ropes and pedals, and even a spinning aerial screw that looks eerily like a helicopter. Around 1505, he wrote an entire codex on the flight of birds, and much of it is genuinely brilliant. He understood that flight is a negotiation with an invisible substance that pushes back. He was studying exactly the right problem, but every one of his machines leaned on one fatal assumption, that a human body could power bird-style flapping. It can't. Not then, not now, not with any amount of training. A bird is, by weight, largely flight muscle, a feathered engine tuned over millions of years for exactly this job. A human is mostly not. Our chest and shoulder muscles can't come anywhere near the sustained power. For our weight, that flapping flight demands at human size. And we know this isn't just pessimism, because in the 1970s, someone finally ran the experiment properly. Engineer Paul McCready built the Gossamer Condor, a human-powered aircraft with enormous feather-light fixed wings. In 1977, a cyclist pedaled it around a figure-8 course and made history. 2 years later, its successor, the Gossamer Albatross, was pedaled all the way across the English Channel. So yes, human muscle can fly, but look at how. Giant fixed wings, a spinning propeller, and not one single flap. The only way a human body has ever flown under its own power is with wings that hold perfectly still. That is the wall even Leonardo couldn't break. So for humans to leave the ground, somebody had to stop imitating the bird's engine entirely, and see, and cheat. In 1783 in France, two brothers found the cheat. Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier were in the paper business, and they had noticed something anyone who's watched a fireplace knows: hot air rises. So they built a giant paper-lined balloon, lit a fire underneath, and let physics do the lifting. In June 1783 in the town of Annonay, their unmanned balloon climbed high over an astonished crowd. By September, they were performing at Versailles before the King of France, with the greatest crew in aviation history: a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. Send up a barnyard, see if the sky is survivable. The animals came down fine, minus some dignity. So, on the 21st of November, 1783, two men, Pilatre de Rosier and the Marquis d'Arlande, stepped into the basket, cast off the ropes, and became the first humans in history to fly free of the Earth, drifting for about 25 minutes over the rooftops of Paris. In 1785, a balloon even crossed the English Channel, its two-man crew throwing ballast, equipment, and reportedly most of their clothes overboard to stay out of the water. Humanity was airborne, and Paris went balloon mad. And yet, this was a dead end too. Because a balloon doesn't really fly, it floats. It goes exactly where the wind goes, at the speed the wind chooses, and no amount of courage can steer it. And the sky made the point brutally. The same year, Pilatre de Rosier, the first man ever to fly, died trying to cross the channel the other way when his experimental balloon came down. The first person the sky lifted became one of the first it killed. The balloon was a miracle with no steering wheel. Real flight, going where you choose, was still locked behind that strange question from the beginning of this video. What is air actually doing under a wing? The answer fits in your hand. Literally, you felt it out of a car window. Forget birds and feathers for 2 minutes. What actually holds a flying machine up? Four forces, locked in a permanent four-way argument. Weight pulls you down, lift pushes you up, thrust drives you forward, drag holds you back. Win the argument on both axes and you fly. Lift, the mysterious one, turns out to have a beautifully blunt explanation. A wing is a machine for throwing air at the ground. Hold your hand flat out of a car window and tilt it slightly upward. The air slams into the tilted surface, gets deflected downward, and your hand gets shoved up. That's Newton. Push air down and the air pushes you back up. A real wing, with its tilt and its gentle curve, is a vastly refined version of your hand out that window. By the way, you may have heard a tidier sounding story about air racing over the curved top of the wing to catch up with the air underneath. That version is so wrong that NASA keeps pages online specifically to debunk it. The truth is simpler and stranger. Anything that deflects enough air downward fast enough will fly. One more thing hides inside that sentence. Hold on to it. If a wing makes lift by throwing air downward, then a wing turned on its side, spinning, throwing air backward, would make push. It sounds like a throwaway line. Later in this video, that one idea, a wing that rotates, is going to help two bicycle mechanics win the entire sky. Keep watching, because first someone had to see the wing itself. Not a bird's wing, a fixed one. And the man who saw it engraved it on a coin. Sir George Cayley was a Yorkshire baronet, and he is the most important inventor most people have never heard of. In 1799, Cayley engraved his big idea onto a small silver disc. On one side, the four forces, lift, weight, thrust, drag, named and separated for the first time. On the other, a flying machine unlike anything ever drawn before. A fixed wing, a boat-like body for the pilot. And at the back, pay attention, a tail. Remember Aylmer, dying certain a tail was the one thing he'd missed, and Ibn Firnas, limping away with the same complaint? 800 years later, here is the physics agreeing with them. A tail is what keeps a flying machine steady. They weren't wrong, they were early. That little silver disc is essentially the birth certificate of the airplane. And its real genius is the split. Let a fixed wing make the lift, Cayley said, and let something else entirely make the push. The bird does both jobs with one pair of wings, and that, he realized, was exactly why copying the bird kept failing. It's the hardest possible version of the problem. He published his research, built model gliders, kept refining for half a century. And then, in 1853, he put a full-sized glider on a hillside at Brompton Dale, and put a passenger in it. Not himself. Sir George was about 80, his coachman, according to the family story. The glider swept down and across the little valley and thumped to a landing, making that anonymous employee arguably the first adult in history to fly a fixed-wing aircraft. Tradition says he stood up out of the landing and resigned on the spot. I was hired to drive, not to fly. The line is probably polished. The flight was real. 1,000 years of flapping had produced nothing but broken legs. And one man who borrowed only the bird's wing, never its wing beat, had just flown a human being across a valley. Now the design existed. What flight needed next was data, and the man who gathered it would pay for every data point with his own body. Otto Lilienthal was a German engineer who did the thing nobody in 1,000 years of tower jumping had bothered to do. He practiced. Starting in 1891 from an artificial hill he built outside Berlin, Lilienthal made close to 2,000 glider flights, hanging beneath elegant fixed wings of willow and waxed cotton, steering by swinging his own body weight. And notice the pattern again. Here was a man obsessed with birds. He'd even written a book on bird flight as the basis of aviation, but he took from the bird its wing shape, never its wing beat. His gliders did not flap. The photographs of him, a bearded man in knee breeches, hanging serene beneath a great curved wing, high over a hillside, went around the world. Flight suddenly stopped looking like a fairy tale and started looking like an engineering problem with a man already halfway inside it. Then, in August 1896, a gust stalled his glider in midair. It dropped. He broke his spine and died the next day. He is said to have told his brother, at the end, sacrifices must be made. Here's what didn't die with him. The data, 2,000 flights of it. An engineer in Chicago named Octave Chanute had compiled every scrap of flight research on Earth into one book, and he made sure everything Cayley had seen and everything Lilienthal had died measuring landed in the right hands. And in 1899, it landed in the strangest possible place, a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, run by two brothers who had never built a flying machine in their lives. They would need exactly 4 years. Wilbur and Orville Wright got into flight the way you'd hope engineers would. They read everything and then trusted nothing. Their first insight separates them from every other inventor on Earth. In 1899, while everyone else chased bigger engines and stronger wings, the Wrights decided the real unsolved problem was steering. They were bicycle men, remember? A bicycle is unstable. It falls over standing still. And yet any child can ride one because the rider is constantly, almost unconsciously in control. An airplane, they reasoned, would be the same kind of machine. Not a thing you launch, a thing you ride. So they invented the riding. Watching how a long, cardboard box twisted in their hands, they worked out wing warping, twisting the wingtips in opposite directions to bank and roll. Combined with an elevator to pitch the nose and a rudder to swing it, they had something no human had ever possessed, command of a machine in all three dimensions at once. Roll, pitch, yaw. Every aircraft you've ever boarded still steers with those three axes. Then, Lilienthal's numbers let them down. Their gliders made less lift than his tables promised. So in 1901, they built a 6-foot wind tunnel in the back of the bike shop and remeasured everything, testing miniature wing after miniature wing until they owned the best aerodynamic data on the planet. And when no one could tell them how a propeller really worked, they solved it with the idea you've been holding since the car window. A propeller is just a wing that rotates, throwing air backward instead of downward. There it is. That's the payoff. Look at what's happening in that bike shop. Nothing is imitating a bird anymore. It's wind tunnels, data tables, control systems. And on the morning of December the 17th, 1903, on the cold sand flats near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, it all came together. The brothers had flipped a coin for the first try. Wilbur won it days earlier and promptly stalled the machine into the sand. So it was Orville who lay down on the wing of their spindly wood and muslin flyer, opened up its little 12-horsepower engine, lawnmower power roughly, and rose into the air. 12 seconds. About 120 feet. They flew 4 times that day. On the last flight, Wilbur stayed up nearly a full minute and covered 852 feet. Was it truly the world's first flight? Honest answer, it's still argued. In 1906, the Brazilian Alberto Santos Dumont flew publicly in Paris, taking off under his own power before a cheering crowd. And to this day, much of Brazil celebrates him, not the Wrights, as first. Gustav Whitehead's claimed 1901 flights have believers too, though the evidence is thin and most historians remain unconvinced. But by the strictest test, powered, controlled, sustained, repeatable, the consensus keeps landing on that freezing December morning. Because the Wrights hadn't just gotten off the ground, they could steer. And once humans could steer the sky, history itself changed speed. Watch how fast this goes now. 1903. The flyer skims 12 seconds over the sand, barely outrunning its own shadow. 6 years later, 1909. Louis Blériot coaxes his fragile monoplane across the English Channel in 37 minutes, and Britain wakes up to discover it is no longer really an island. 5 years after that, the sky is a battlefield. Biplanes wheeling and diving over the trenches of the First World War, aircraft evolving faster in 4 years than in the previous 40. In 1927, a quiet airmail pilot named Charles Lindbergh flies alone through the night, 33.5 hours nonstop, New York to Paris, and steps out of the cockpit the most famous man alive. 1939, the propeller itself gets overthrown. A German test aircraft, the Heinkel He-178, screams down a runway on pure jet thrust, no propeller at all. 1947, Chuck Yeager, flying with cracked ribs he'd hidden from his superiors, drops from the belly of a bomber in the bright orange Bell X-1 and punches clean through the sound barrier. And then it is July 20th, 1969, and a human boot is pressing into gray lunar dust, 250,000 miles from Kitty Hawk. From a 12-second hop over the sand to standing on the moon, 66 years, one human lifetime. A child born the winter the flyer first lifted could have watched the moon landing at 65 on the television in their living room. That is what happens when a species stops guessing and starts understanding. But before this story closes, I owe somebody an apology. The birds. Because let's be honest about them. Flapping was never wrong. Birds, bats, and every insect on Earth fly brilliantly by flapping. It's simply a solution tuned to their scale. Small bodies, extraordinary muscles, wings doing things per second that our machines couldn't dream of matching. Flapping doesn't scale up to a person, but it scales down beautifully. Today, engineers have built a robotic gull with flexing, twisting wings so lifelike that it has cruised over exhibition halls to the visible confusion of everyone below. Researchers have built flapping micro-drones that weigh about as much as a few sheets of paper and fly themselves through buildings. At the size where flapping actually belongs, we finally did copy the bird, properly this time with data instead of faith, and it works beautifully. The tower jumpers weren't fools. They were just 11 centuries early and about 60 kilograms too heavy. So run the tape of this whole story back because there's a pattern in it, and it's not the one we usually tell ourselves about invention. We love saying nature is the great teacher, her answer's out there waiting to be copied. But look at what actually happened. Every failure in this story is someone copying the bird harder, the wax wings, the feather suits, the flapping machines, a millennium of broken legs. And every breakthrough is someone walking away from the bird. A kite on a string, a balloon full of hot air, a silver disc with a fixed wing, a wind tunnel in a bike shop. We did not conquer the sky by imitating nature. We conquered it by giving up the one thing everyone was certain was the secret, and understanding the air instead. Nature had a billion-year head start. Different materials, different muscles, different rules. Copying her answer failed for 1,000 years. Learning her physics won in about 100. And the quiet proof of how right that turn was? We've never needed another one. The machine Cayley engraved on a coin and the Wrights taught to steer, fixed wing, tail thrust, 3-axis control, is still underneath everything. Every airliner and every jet in the sky over your head tonight. A century of refinement. 0 replacements. Which brings us back to you, seat 23A, somewhere over the Atlantic. Blind half closed. That old thought still hanging in the air. What if I could just strap on wings and fly? Look out the window one more time. That long, still, unflapping wing, holding you 38,000 feet above the ocean, that's Aylmer's missing tail, and Cayley's silver disc, and Lilienthal's 2,000 flights, and a propeller that's secretly a wing, all frozen into one shape and carrying you across an ocean while you complain about the legroom. A monk once shattered both legs chasing a rougher version of the thought you just had. He'd have traded anything for your seat. The sky doesn't reward imitation. It rewards understanding. And understanding, it turns out, doesn't feel like flapping. It feels like this. 900 kilometers an hour in a chair in the sky with the window seat. By the way, did you know the phone on which you are watching this video runs on a trick from the year 1800 that we've never replaced either, just refined over and over until it fit in your pocket? And its story might be even stranger than this one. It starts with a 2,000-year-old clay jar, dug out of the ground near Baghdad, that looked, for a few glorious years, like proof that the ancient world had electricity. I told that whole story in another video. It's on your screen right now. See you there.